Welcome to Fyght Talk. My name is Christian Young. Seeds, in fact, do grow. Welcome to Fyght Talk. My name is Christian Young. Today, we're going to talk about the case for when and also maintaining motivation. One of the things that I talk to my clients about a lot is the fact that they can feel as though they're running in place, as though they're working very hard and there's nothing happening. And what we usually do in that case is sit down and have a conversation about the fact that they're currently in what I would consider their seeding phase, meaning that they are making sure that everything's ready so that when the garden is going to grow, that they're ready to handle all of that growth. And I think that that is something that's very important to be knowledgeable around as an entrepreneur. You will do things that may not have an immediate return, but it's building foundation rather than just having all of this instant gratification. And in today's world, it's tough to kind of battle that. One of the things that I've noted in my own business is that there's a lot of preparation. There's a lot of setup. We have to conceptualize every single thing that we're trying to do before we bring it to market. And that takes time. So you have to be patient with yourself and give yourself grace that while you may not have this instant magic wand that will make things happen immediately, you can still grow your business and work hard and realize a return. And it's important that you continue to stay motivated, as you will be your biggest cheerleader. And sometimes, although you will have down days, it's all right. Like, one bad day does not ruin a business. One bad week does not ruin a business. You just have to continue to remain cognizant of the fact that you have a plan, you're working your plan, and by being diligent about your plan, it will always be a case of when rather than a case of if. We have a client now that's going back and redoing a lot of things for their business, and it's a constant struggle because that stuff takes time, especially when you're going back to rework certain aspects. And I think that you can get really down on yourself, and it can be a little bit impactful to your mental health as an entrepreneur to know that I'm working so hard but I'm not seeing anything happen as of yet. And that is something that I think every single entrepreneur goes through at some phase within their journey. I think that what we'll see is that a lot of people will decide to just give up. And I think that you have to decide to give yourself grace. Now, not saying that you should just be running into a wall every 5 minutes, but if you feel as though you're stuck, definitely take some time and talk to other people, understand their experiences, because what I've seen is that shared experiences are really helpful, especially in entrepreneurship. It's always good to understand how someone else got out of a situation, or to take a tip from someone to understand how you can maybe pivot just slightly and still get the same return that you were looking for. So thank you for joining us today. Today, I am joined by the CEO of Love Dot, and her name is Nneka, and she's going to tell us a little bit about her business as we talk about the fact that seeds do actually grow, and this is planning and preparing the case for when. Hi, Nneka.
Hi.
How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Can you tell us a little bit about Love Dot before we kind of dive into it?
Absolutely. So Love Dot is a fashion and lifestyle brand that is focused on being able to use traditional textiles to connect the diaspora and really uplift those who are bold, ambitious, and out in the world trying to create something new. So how we do that is by partnering with smaller businesses across the continent that are really focused on producing textiles in a very traditional way, and that I can use their workshops to really bring my ideas to life. So on both sides of the Atlantic, I'm not just empowering individuals and communities, but I'm also creating things that are one of a kind, timeless, and will really kind of set the tone for how people want to show up in rooms and really own who they are and own the bold visions that they are bringing to life.
And I see that you might be maybe wearing a little bit of Love Dot with us today.
I am. This is one of our kimono pieces. It's reversible. We make the prints in-house. So all of them are going to be distinctively different because, as you can imagine, one of the processes that we use is called batik. In some parts of the world, it's called something a little different, so a dire, batik, but it's a wax-resistant process, so really driven by nature. So it's taking wax, stamps, applying it to cotton, and then dyeing it, and then letting it dry and repeating the process for a particular design. So each time you do that, each yard is going to be slightly different, which to me really embodies what it means to be a person who's trying to blaze their own trail, right? Like everybody's thumbprint is different. There's no two people in the world that have the same thumbprint DNA, unless you're probably twins. But I really do think that we've grown up in a culture of fashion, and just a culture in general, where everyone is kind of trying to mimic what's popular. And there's not a lot of room for those people who just want to stand out, be themselves, and do things that are innate to their vision, their heart, and the impact that they want to have. And I do think a lot of those people exist within Black and African communities around the world. And so what I'm really trying to do is marry that kind of sense of reckless and bold ambition with this uniqueness of who we are that needs to be celebrated more versus kind of complicated by just being kind of a copycat and one and the same. And do that in a way that brings a lot of traditional textiles and fabrics that have long been lost to big fashion entities back to the forefront, right? So my vision is to really be able to create things that trailblazers are wearing in different spaces that tell a unique story that connects people back to the roots of where a lot of things began, which is on the continent.
So one of the things that you talk about being unique and blazing trails, and I think that resonates with me because as a part of this topic in particular, I talk about the fact that, you have to spend time within your business seeding and making sure that you're prepared for whatever your garden will look like. Of course, it's going to be unique. Making sure that you're prepared for what the results of that seeding are. And seeding, of course, can make you feel like, during your individual journey that you're not doing things fast enough. It's not working how other people have worked in the past. You saw something on television where someone came up with one idea and all of a sudden they're like 100 billionaire. And I think that the concept of being unique in entrepreneurship is something that isn't celebrated as much as it probably should be. And I just wanted to kind of get your perspective, especially kind of being in this type of industry where you're also working with additional entrepreneurs to get your product to market. Like, what have you seen in some of those journeys?
I would say that the biggest challenge many people have when it comes down to identifying their seeds, their points of difference, what it means to be truly unique, is understanding that there aren't a lot of new ideas in the world, which I think could be a hindrance for a lot of people because it's like, well, someone else has done this before, right? But when you tap into what makes you different and the angle that you are applying to something, or even how you aim to solve that challenge a little differently, that's to me where, when we say seeding and those points of difference, that's the thing that you have to actually nurture. How are you doing things different? How are you telling that story differently, where you build up confidence in terms of how your approach is going to be unique and refreshing, right? And so much of that is really instilled in you, right? Like, what's different about you? What are you bringing to the table that is fresh, and what's that confidence level that you have in terms of how you even see yourself versus, you comparing what you're doing with everybody else who's doing something in the same or similar lanes in your particular space. I think that it's very important for every entrepreneur to recognize that the growth stage is probably a stage that you're always going to be in no matter where you are in the journey. And that's something that I've had to really get settled in, is that no matter where I am, how well the business is doing, whatever milestones I've set for myself this year, the very fact that I'm doing what I'm doing and I'm pushing forward is a point of growth, right? I'm taking everything that I'm learning, the mistakes, which you learn more from your mistakes than the actual things that went well. and using that to be able to see the next iteration or to be able to build upon how am I going to pivot from this to get closer to ultimately where I want to be based on learning from whatever challenges or mistakes or things that I didn't quite do or didn't quite turn out the way I expected them to be able to refine the model, refine what I'm doing, and to really kind of push forward in my own doubt and just continue to figure out a way to make it work, right? So I definitely agree, like that point of like seeding that idea, trying to figure out how to make it different and unique. I don't think it's something that you get in the first kind of year or two of even a business. You may start with a very kind of clear or sometimes even loose nugget of what you want to do. But the more you do it, the more you're going to get clarity around the what, right? Maybe not so the why, but what it is, how it looks, how it's supposed to come to life, what are the opportunities, and it may take you in slightly different directions than when you originally started, but you have to go through that period of slightly putting it out there, seeing what people have to say, learning from your customers, right? So like nobody likes to do these markets, but the ability to sit there and talk to people, hearing their feedback about how a hemline hits on their body for me, or just where they imagine kind of showing up and wearing these things, or seeing some of the creative that we put out into the world and getting more inspired about, oh, like I want to actually go and visit this place and see this process up close and personal. Those become little nuggets of like, oh, so I can actually evolve my offering in this type of way. Like, where does this go on a timeline? I'm doing a little bit of travel and textile experiences, or connecting people more to the stories of the entrepreneurs that I may be collaborating with in some of these spaces to help boost them, but also create a pathway for some of the collaborations that we may be doing in the future. So that seeding piece of it takes a long time. It's going to be pretty much the threshold for the first couple of years. But to use it wisely, you should be taking things that you're learning from it to be able to reseed, so to speak, right? Continue to kind of plant and plot, right? Where does it fall on the timeline? Like, what can I do with this and evolve where you are?
So you mentioned time.
Mm-hmm.
All of these things take time.
Mm-hmm.
And in my world, when I hear time, I hear patience requirement.
Yeah.
How do you maneuver in those instances where you're seeding and it feels like you're just like running and running and running, but the race isn't over, or you may feel like you're running into walls, or nothing is growing right now?
Yeah. I feel like that's where I am right now. So I can tell you exactly how I'm trying to maneuver it right now.
Okay.
One, I think that it's not even me thinking. Time feels accelerated. I've had this conversation with so many people where this year feels like it's gone, particularly after May, from May to September. And I'm like, what has happened to the last 3-4 months? So if you add that level, that layer onto this idea of like, where I had these milestones for myself, I have not hit them. How do you navigate all of that together, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm constantly forcing myself to do is take a step back and review my progress. Take a step back and stop looking at everybody else. Because what I recognize is some of the entrepreneurs that I see who are, I know, above and beyond where I am right now, they're also struggling with their own milestones and timelines that they don't feel like they've hit. But I'm like, I wish I could have hit those. And I'm pretty sure in the reverse, there's people who are like, I wish I've hit yours, right?
Mm-hmm.
So reflection and introspection to me are probably the biggest pieces of the puzzle, which goes back to this point of mindset. Because the way we choose to think about things is what keeps us either in the journey or gives us the excuses to leave it. And I've been looking, I'll be honest, for many excuses to be like, you know what, maybe I've learned a lot in this journey, but maybe it's not something that I need to continue on. But it's something that keeps me grounded in the vision for what you're trying to do with Love Dot. It may not be something that everyone quite fully understands yet, but it's meant to be a part of your path and your purpose. So I'm constantly trying to find points where I'm reflecting back on progress. Sometimes that's literally going back into my Instagram feed and seeing some of the work that we've done, campaigns that we've done, particularly in the last year. Even like posts that I've made, and then reflecting back on like, wait, I actually just went to Ghana after meeting the supplier like twice. Decided that I was going to actually give this a real shot with making my own textiles, and decided that I also was going to go into retail in a pretty significant investment that ultimately didn't turn out well, but I got a lot out of it, right? I literally have to take moments where I go back and look back. I literally stop and look back just to say like, wait a minute, but you weren't here 2 years ago, right? This is where you were 2 years ago. You've done some really cool things, right? That's a plus. Or hearing people, and it's always like a little moment where you're about to like just let it go, because the time, nothing is like hitting where you want it to hit. And I'll get like an email for someone like, hey, I just wanted to let you know, I think the prints are stunning. I absolutely love it. I'm going to tell a friend. I'm like, oh, okay, so maybe I shouldn't stop. Or when I have, particularly the people that I collaborate with. So I have a brand in South Africa, Beats by Flex, that we have never met. How I even encountered his brand was at a trade show right before the pandemic in New York. And it was a representative of his brand there. And I was kind of looking at the different materials that he was using. And he kind of found me afterwards and kept following Love Dot. And I'm like, I don't know why. Like, we're still trying to figure ourselves out. And eventually we did a couple collaborations, and the workmanship and the craftsmanship is stunning. Like, we've now done some collections that have been like my brainchild and his like talent coming together, and have been very well received. But the partnership is so unique because he's really excited the fact that I'm bringing my marketing background, which is professionally where I've built my career, into a collaboration that supports both of our businesses and the possibilities of where it can go, right? The plans that we've laid out. And every once in a while, I have to like harken back to like the conversations that we have and the plans, the things that we have in motion. And the energy that I get from recognizing in those moments is like, actually, this is not about me and this business. Like, everything that you said that you want to do about lifting up communities around the world and the talent of other individuals to be able to connect not just what we're doing together to the world, but also people to the stories of these different, makers and communities and cultures that they may not be familiar with. It's happening. And someone else is excited about it, right? And not only excited about it, almost depending on you to help kind of continuously push this forward, to be able to literally lift other people up, right? To build workshops, to really create something that has a lot of viability and really brings someone else's or just talent to the forefront in a completely different way. And so just reflecting on that for me has been really big, but also seeing that like it's actually real. It's actually happening. Maybe not as big as I want it to happen right now, but it's not a dream. It's real, right? Just waiting for my dreams to like blossom more. But it's not something that isn't impossible. It's just taking a little longer. It's a lot more for me to learn. And the more I focus on the progress and not necessarily focus on the destination, I guess you can say, the easier it is for me to keep pushing and keep going.
So I think that you brought up one of the things that we've talked about a lot in our own conversations around mindset. And one of the things that is very important to me, and I will say it over and over again, it's never a case of if, it's a case of when. And there's a nuance to that, because when I think about terms of if and when, a lot of times it's more directed towards like, what is the art of the possible? Like, what can you accomplish? If you decide that every day you want to go to work in a private jet, when are we going to make that happen? It's not, will that ever happen?
Right.
Now, it's kind of difficult to do that. But it's possible.
Right.
And I think that, how did you manage the shift in kind of mindset to really start focusing on the fact that you can make all of these things happen? It's more of a case of when, rather than questioning whether or not something will happen.
I think I'm still making that shift actively, because I have moments where I'm like, will this ever happen? And I think that's natural, right? Like I'm one of those rabbit hole people who I'm constantly looking for inspiration in the world, to make me feel less crazy about where I'm dedicating my time, right? And sometimes it takes me down the path of like different, whether it's motivational speakers or, the stories of different entrepreneurs who aren't necessarily the ones that everybody celebrates, but have really successful companies, and hearing how they navigated challenges. Because, sometimes you feel like, because you're doing something that hasn't been done for you before, right? You're creating it all from scratch. That the people who have done it didn't go through the same points of doubt, or didn't go through the same, whether it's financial or, relational challenges of just finding the right people and figuring things out. And when you actually dive into their stories, and when people want to be truthful, you realize that actually they did, right? The only thing that is the difference between them and everybody else who were probably on the same journey and just stopped was that they decided not to stop, and was, bullheaded enough to keep pushing, and allowed the possibilities of the win to feel bigger and speak louder to them than the, impossibilities of the if, right? And that's the thing that I've constantly been kind of focused on. And when I say finding inspiration, like literally finding inspiration, anything from just hearing people share their stories on social media, or just seeing something as, to me right now, powerful is like seeing the trajectory of like what's happening in the presidential campaign, where, granted, like, yes, Kamala was the vice president, but now like this just moment of shift where now she's in the driver's seat of this election. It's like, to me, those are moments of like, what is possible? Because did she see that coming? We didn't see possibly that coming, right? Like, you never know when those shifts are happening. So me just finding points of inspiration pretty much anywhere is the thing that keeps me from leaning too far into the if, and really being focused or refocusing myself on the when, right? Like, you don't know. If you're a person, and I am a person of faith, like, I have to focus on the fact that if I'm doing the work, I'm making the connections. There's so much of this I'm not going to have a very clear answer to, but I have to pay attention to the fact that this won't let me go. This idea, this business, regardless if I strip out all the other responsibilities I have with it, just the vision and the intent of what I want to do keeps driving me. The ideas keep flowing around it. So that's enough to let me know I'm doing the right thing. Now it's a matter of like, do it consistently, go out and seek what you don't know, and, have the mindset and the prayer point of, may those who are meant to help me on this journey, our paths intersect and they find me, right? And I'm open, and I understand that in those moments, I'm there to not just leverage those moments, but also allow them to leverage me to be able to get one step closer to where I want to be. So it is something I'm constantly and actively, like, in this process of reminding myself, like, and how I do that is those moments of inspiration, that's positive self-talk. Like, it really is, because I really do get to a place sometimes where I'm like, what am I doing? Especially like a year like last year, and even this year has been a little bit better, but the first couple months of this year, it's like, where are the sales? Everything was very slow and quiet. Last year was a hit. Last year was a big hit. I went into retail, and then they went belly up. No warning, was doing pretty good. And I'm like, I invested everything because I thought this thing was going to be like a great jumping off point, only to have everything I invested plus everything I made to go. And I was like, should I keep going? Literally. Like, because this is now a if and when, right? Conversation in my head. And I'm like, clearly this is not when. It's like me back to this place of, if can this even work?
Mm-hmm.
And I really had to take the first couple of months of this year to say, like, actually, you're going to make this work. So back to your point about if versus when, I had to force myself back into a when moment, because last year really took me into this place of like, I don't think everything feels like it's working against me right now, even when I'm doing things that I feel like I was directed to do.
So then I have a follow-up, because you literally just triggered a thought in my head, and it was just more around how you deal with the fact that the seeds that you planted, it's a different kind of plant that's coming out of the ground. Like when your when shifts.
Yeah.
So it may be like, I want to know when I'm going to arrive at work every day in a private jet. And now it may have morphed into I would like to take a submarine. How do you shift, your mindset and not dwell on what it was?
I think, so for me, I've been so committed to seeing the brand and the business successful that I won't allow myself to not deal with the pivots, right? When I first started Love Dot, it was started as a marketplace to really adhere to the idea of there are many beautiful things in the world that connect us, that are made with a lot of purpose and passion and, intent, right? Because they're handmade, using a lot of locally sourced whatever. And I want to curate those things and bring them to the forefront for people, right? To love, experience, and learn the stories about. And that felt right at the time, but it was also an imposter response to what I really wanted Love Dot to be, because I didn't think I was a strong enough designer to be able to actually just say, actually, I want to just design unique pieces that pulled from the natural processes that exist within certain industries, or that brought back to life very traditional elements of like culture that have either been lost or been mass produced in some other parts of the world, right? And I didn't have a blueprint. It's like, yes, I can go to different places, but like, do I know people? Like, do I know people in all these different regions? No. So why I had to wind up pivoting was, one, the pandemic. Kind of hard to get people from different parts of the world to be sending and, sourcing things from when half the world is shut down. And then two, that was a good starting point for reflection for a lot of us. And I'm like, well, why not just go for broke? Go for the thing that you actually want to do and start to put some things that you really like out in the world that really reflect you and your journey and your boldness, but also something that you think really matters, which is people really using tradition to learn about each other, right? And so that was the first big pivot, which was a bit scary. It felt a little limiting, but I made the decision to make the pivot, and that pivot has been stronger than the original idea, right? And so that in itself, being open to it and really kind of coming to that place in a season where reflection was the only thing we had time to do, was a plus. I think the other piece of it is that, just personally, and this has no real business context to it, it's more ego than anything, I named this company after my mom to pay homage to her, to honor her legacy and memory, and build something that generationally will stand. It cannot fail. It's like, that's just a mindset thing. Like, if it needs to pivot into a pure textile business where I'm literally working across the continent to like become more of a B2B model than B2C, it will pivot to that, right? But it cannot, like, the essence of being able to build economic opportunity through fashion, through this textile industry that takes what has always been there from a traditional perspective and brings it to the forefront of the masses and connects the diaspora to the world. That's my goal, right? I'd love to do that with the end product and some of my designs, but I can also do with it with designing prints, right? And going into different communities and bringing those things back up to the forefront. And so that's my goal. I will pivot. I have nothing at this point to really lose other than the idea of like, why am I doing all this now in my 40s versus 10 years ago? But yeah.
So just to clarify a point, no fashion design background.
No. My grandmother did sew. My mom did too. My grandmother was more proficient in it because she was old school. She made a lot of things and was very, very stylish. My mom was too. She had her own sense of styles, very like retro. Like she just had sensibilities that were all her. I don't have a fashion design background, but I like design. I like art. Like my background is in marketing and creativity, right? And so even, I still work full time, but even then, the things that how I tell stories through images and words in a deck and graphics is something that people who work with me, it's like, how did you come up with that? Like, can you help me with this? Like putting things together in a way that is a point of expression is something I've always liked because I'm always thinking about how things come together. I'm finding little points of inspiration of like, oh, I can tell a story with how of progress by just looking at those wires, the colors, and like how that flows year by year and like what that should look like from one axis to the other. So the design piece of how you visualize things, it's always been a passion point of mine. It's always been something that I've strived to do well because I feel like if you're telling a story, it's both in your words as well as in your visuals. But the fashion design piece, no, I have no background. I can sketch because I always knew how to draw. I just didn't nurture it as well as I should have growing up. But art has been a thing. Sketching has been a thing. To make little sculptures when I was a kid, that was a thing. Still have some of those. It was something I didn't fully nurture because it's like, well, how do you make money with this? But as you get older and you start to realize what really matters and how much of your time in your day you spend just trying to make money, it's like, well, let me figure out how to do that with something that I can actually lean into so far that I forget I'm working.
Okay. So I think that what I've heard from you today is mindset, patience, pivots, and being at peace with the pivots. There's a lot of peace here. And really just not becoming your own barrier to entry.
Yes. Which is
in
hard.
a lot of these instances, which is hard because, as you said, you didn't have a fashion design background and now you're a designer with your own brand.
And I've gotten very comfortable with saying I am a designer. It took a while. I mean, I had a conversation with somebody about that like a couple of weeks ago. Like, to be honest, the reason why I never was clear, could never really talk about Left Eye is because I was always very hung up on, can I call myself a designer? And it wasn't until I did a pop-up a couple years ago, and even though it was a couple years ago, it just settled in my mind this year, what she said, at a bridal gallery here in Chicago. It's owned by a woman who is a, designer trained, both sketches and, cuts her own patterns, does all the things, right? And she was looking at the patterns and the dresses, and she was like, these are amazing. I want to buy one for my mom. She buys one for her mom. And we just got into a conversation, and I think I stumbled through some question that she asked about like, oh, so how long have you been designing? I was kind of, She's like, look, most designers that you know don't actually sew. They sketch. I was like, I sketch. She's like, yeah, that's majority of designers. Very few actually can do both. And as I thought about it, and then watching enough documentaries of like really well-known designers, I was like, you're actually right. A lot of them have very basic skills of understanding how to construct an item or like a article of clothing or whatever, but they have a vision they work with people to bring to life. And once I get over that hump, I was like, yeah, I have a vision that I'm working with people to bring to life. And that vision is both in the clothing, but it's also in the bigger purpose of what it is that I'm doing as a whole. So
that's amazing. You're a designer. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And can you share your socials for everyone? Absolutely.
So website-wise is www.lovedot.co, so .co. And then we're both on Instagram as well as Facebook, TikTok as well, but just not as much, at LOVEDOTTM. So love.tm.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.